Hi there, I'm Stephanie, and I'm so glad you've tuned in to watch this webinar today. If you are tired of spinning your wheels with health problems that never seem to get any better, you've come to the right place. I've been a cardiac RN for over 27 years, and I know firsthand how much effort, time, and money we expend as individuals and as a society on medications and costly treatments, invasive procedures, and surgeries that simply never address the underlying cause of our health problems. I was amazed when I experienced firsthand and also learned the science behind the effectiveness of a whole food plant-based diet in treating the cause of the vast majority of our health problems. And you know what? If you give your body the right fuel, it just seems to heal itself. So you might want to grab a pen and paper in case you want to take some notes, and then I'll see you in the webinar. Hello friends, thank you for tuning in and welcome to my Change Your Food, Change Your Life webinar. So to start off, let me tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Stephanie Spencer and I've been an RN for about 27 years. I've worked mostly in cardiology, which gives me a bit of perspective about the #1 cause of death in this country. I spent about 2 decades directing an outpatient heart failure clinic, and then I also developed some home infusion therapy programs for end-stage heart failure patients, like with some hardcore IV medicine that we use to bridge them to heart transplants and artificial hearts, and also use around end of life. And really the term for what I did was called chronic disease management, which is really a concept that encompasses the vast majority of what we do as a healthcare system today. And for years, I've watched my patients suffer and have their lives upended by diseases that all have one thing in common. They are all largely caused by the food that we eat, and they are all largely preventable. So early last year, I had just gotten to the point where I was ready for a change. And so I took a completely different path and I started a microgreens business. And I wasn't following a plant-based diet at the time, but I had heard that microgreens are healthy and I wanted to work more with food and health. And so I sold this product at farmers markets on Saturdays and then to a bunch of restaurants. And then like right about the time I'd started this business, fate intervened, and then diet and nutrition really became relevant all of a sudden in our personal lives. So let me just tell you the story. My husband, Paul, had issues with having like these little bumps in his belly. He'd seen the doctors about it, and they're like on his legs and stuff too, just a couple here and there. And they'd say like, oh, well, it's a fatty tumor, it's a lipoma, this is benign, it's no big deal. But then one day Paul came home and he said, you know, these fatty tumors in my belly are just getting bigger and bigger and they're spreading and I just can't stand it anymore. And I've just got to go to the doctor and see if they can cut it out or something. And I told him, you know, like they're not going to cut those out. But you know, Paul is a regular guy. He hates going to the doctor. So I was like, oh, finally, good. You're going to go to the doctor. We're going to get annual blood work on you that you've needed to get for years. And so anyway, he went in and he had all his blood work done. Then a couple days later, his doctor called him back, and Paul is a history teacher. He's not medical at all. And so what Paul hears when his doctor called him with his lab results was that your labs all look great and something about a hemoglobin level, but everything really looks great. And that's what Paul told me. And when I heard hemoglobin, I knew exactly what that was, and I knew it wasn't his blood count. And so I told him that he was going to get all these labs and I wanted them in my hand. And so we got the lab results, and sure enough, Paul was pre-diabetic. The lab result that the doctor was talking about was a hemoglobin A1C level, which is a measure of diabetes, basically. And Paul was in the pre-diabetic range. And Paul didn't even comprehend from the conversation with his doctor that like this had something to do with diabetes, and is a fairly big deal if you were under the impression you were not diabetic. And so I was absolutely aghast when I realized that he was pre-diabetic, because I thought we were really healthy. And I know that diabetes is a one-way street when you go the conventional route of medications and insulin. It just never turns around on its own. It only gets worse and worse. And this is what I did for a living. My entire adult life was care for folks that were very ill because of chronic disease that frequently started with something like pre-diabetes or high blood pressure, something that only goes one way, and then complications like heart attacks, wounds, blindness, in the case of diabetes, frequently follow, and goes on to, weekly doctor's appointments. Then you get a wound and you're going to like daily wound clinic treatments for 6 weeks and long-term IV antibiotics and amputations, heart failure, kidney failure. So anyway, I was highly motivated to do whatever we could do to reverse this. And I had actually seen the documentary What the Health about a year earlier, in which I learned that you could reverse diabetes with a whole food plant-based diet. And I had never even known that reversing diabetes was even possible. That never happens with a traditional American Diabetic Association diet, which is like count your carbs, right? So mind you, I've been an RN for almost 30 years. And the way I heard about reversing diabetes, something that affects 10% of the US population, was from a Netflix documentary, okay? But when I heard that Paul was pre-diabetic, there was no way I was going to let him go down this path of steady debilitation, which I knew there was no escape from. So while I had those lab results in my hand, I told him that we were going to switch to a plant-based diet. And luckily, he didn't fight me on it. And so we started right away. We never purchased meat again, albeit, I didn't really know then what I know now. But so we stopped eating meat. We slowly weaned off of dairy. And then, to make a long story short, we both went on over the next several months to lose about 20 pounds. And within 4 months, we repeated Paul's blood work and his A1C was back in the normal range. So we had reversed the pre-diabetes, okay? And, I was so motivated when I first heard that he was, heading towards diabetes, that I didn't care if the cure was to eat dirt. We were going to reverse this. But when we started the plant-based diet, I was absolutely amazed at how easy it was. We were never hungry for the first time in our lives, and I really enjoyed the food. We ate all sorts of fun, new, like ethnic type of dishes instead of just the usual, chicken and broccoli that we used to have. And yeah, I just could not believe how easy it was to make such a simple dietary change that had such life-changing consequences. So at that point, I became really fascinated with a whole food plant-based diet and the research and then about the chronic disease reversal, and really dove into it. And then I went on to get a certification in plant-based nutrition through T. Colin Campbell's Center for Nutrition Studies. And he is the author of the China study, if you've ever heard of that, which is the most comprehensive study on the effects of nutrition on human health ever conducted in medical history. So that's my story. Now let's talk about why many of you may be watching this webinar right now. By middle age, many of us are not particularly pleased with the direction our health is taking. We know we're not bulletproof anymore. And this is when we start to get prescriptions for things like statins for high cholesterol or meds for high blood pressure. We might have a cancer scare here and there. And when you're getting these scripts and stuff in the doctor's office, have you ever asked your doctor if there's some diet that you should try to like really address this problem? And you get a vague like, yeah, a healthy diet. And what does that usually translate to in our real lives? It translates to what I call the chicken salmon diets, or usually like a turkey wrap diet. And we're eating turkey wraps and we have some kale and low fat cheese, and then they'll typically limit bad carbs or whatever, right? And does that transform our lives? Because a lot of people at middle age, like that's all you're really eating anyway. If this diet worked, we would be the healthiest nation on earth, right? But in reality, we spend more than any other country, almost 18% of our gross domestic product on healthcare, and we have the worst outcomes of all the industrialized nations. In America, our current healthy life expectancy is only age 69, and people will spend an average of 17 years in poor health, with the last 9 of those years being debilitated. And our poor health is largely due to what we call chronic disease. These diseases up here like type 2 diabetes, heart disease, heart failure, leads to kidney failure. We have diabetic wounds, we have cancer, all these illnesses, which comprise about 75% of all of our healthcare spending. They are all largely caused by diet and all largely preventable, okay? But unfortunately, our healthcare system is just not really geared to address and treat the underlying common cause of all these chronic diseases, and we simply just treat the symptoms for about the last 20 years of the patient's life. That's what I did. So right at my old job running an outpatient heart failure clinic, I just treated the symptoms of heart failure in my patient. And I was also tasked with keeping very unstable heart failure patients out of the emergency room. This was a mandate under the Affordable Care Act that was put into place in 2010. And I found that the most effective way to do this was to teach them a low sodium diet, because when you have heart failure and your heart's not squeezing strong enough, if you eat a lot of salt, water follows salt and their lungs would fill up with fluid, and everyone that cannot breathe goes to the ER. So I would teach them a low sodium diet, just focusing on natural foods instead of processed foods. I didn't know about a plant-based diet at the time. And then I'd give them all sorts of like customized, low sodium starter kit recipes. And because I can't bill for, dietary teaching. And so that was the most effective thing I could do. And so I would spend a lot of time just trying to do education, but I just kind of tried to automate it because I didn't have a lot of time, and I'd have videos of me telling them like what they need to avoid, as far as diet, so that they can stay out of the ER. And then one day I had a patient say to me, it's the first time anyone's ever said this. He said, "You always tell me what food to avoid, but what should I eat to be healthy?" Meaning, what food should we choose instead of just avoid? That is the question. What are humans supposed to eat for optimum health, right? And I just did not know what to tell him. And it really made me question my life path, because it made me realize that's just not what we do here. And I wanted to tell him, what should you eat? Don't eat anything. Don't eat anything in this hospital. Nothing in the cafeteria. Nothing in my little low sodium starter kit even promotes health. And I knew it. The food that we were telling them to eat is just like less bad than the highly processed fast food. But, low sodium chicken noodle soup isn't going to transform your health, right? So, yeah. And I didn't have the knowledge then that I have now about plant-based nutrition, but I realized I wanted so badly to be able to give him information that would absolutely transform his health by teaching him the nourishing foods that our body is really designed to run on. So, in contrast to the typical American experience of declining health starting at middle age, there are several places where people just don't suffer any of these chronic diseases that affect almost all Americans once we get older. In fact, prior to the exportation of American fast food to every corner of the globe, about 60% of the world's population ate in an entirely different way and didn't suffer any of these American diseases of excess, okay? And there are still a few places on the globe today where people regularly live well into their 90s and beyond with no chronic disease. These are called the blue zones. You might have heard of them. And so what kind of diet do you think that these folks in the blue zones are following? You think they're maybe doing like a keto diet or South Beach maybe, or maybe they're doing Jenny Craig and they're having their portions mailed to them so that they don't eat too much, right? No, of course we know that's ridiculous. These are all plant-based societies, and all of these cultures eat different foods. So we have, like in the upper left, we have Okinawa. They eat a lot of sweet potatoes there. We have the Tarahumara Indians of northern Mexico in the top middle. This is a corn-based diet. In Uganda, they eat, again, a lot of sweet potatoes, millet, sorghum, legumes, green leafy vegetables. They have hospitals in Uganda that don't have a single recorded case of a heart attack or colon cancer. Same in rural China. It's a rice-based culture. They have many hospitals with no recorded heart attacks before age 65 there. Sardinia, this is like fava beans and wild greens. And then the Papua New Guinea Highlanders of in Papua New Guinea, it's mainly a sweet potato based diet. And these are folks that will live well into their 90s. They are active and healthy. And this is contrasted with the average American, remember, who's going to spend the last, on average, 17 years of their life in declining health, with the last 9 years being debilitated. So while the blue zones are eating a diet rich in legumes, whole grains, leafy greens, locally available fruit and vegetables, this pie chart reflects the typical American diet. And these food choices reflect our rates of chronic disease really quite nicely. So let's look at that big purple section, okay? The purple section is refined and processed foods, okay? And when we're talking refined foods, we mean, this isn't just like gas station food. We're talking like any white bread, white starchy things, even oil is a refined food because the fiber has been removed from it, okay? It's not a whole food anymore. So the vast majority of what we eat is some kind of a refined food. Then that orange section there, 25%, that's dairy and animal protein, okay? And that is a large amount of one's caloric intake to be eaten in animal protein, you'll find. But then the green section, that is fruits, vegetables, beans, and legumes, okay? And that's really what we need to eat. Our bodies require fiber, antioxidants, and phytonutrients. And really, we only get appreciable fiber, antioxidants, and phytonutrients from fruits, vegetables, beans, and legumes, these whole foods that grow out of the ground, okay? And so, and actually of this green sliver, half of that in the typical American diet is French fries and potato chips, okay? So it's really only half of that green sliver that is real fruits, vegetables, beans, and legumes, okay? And so when we fill up our bellies with empty calories and with animal protein, we're missing out on all the cancer-fighting phytonutrients that our body requires and filling up on relatively low nutrient density things like cheese and potatoes or meat. And remember, meat and dairy, there is zero fiber in meat and dairy, and our bodies require fiber for health. The average American only gets about 15 grams of fiber a day, and heart disease and cancer are number 1 and number 2 leading causes of death. Remember that Ugandan hospital with no recorded cases of heart attacks or colon cancer? They get an average of 100 grams of fiber a day. That is a lot of fiber. So now I want to talk about some of the most common chronic diseases that afflict us. And the first is diabetes. And you know, diabetes and obesity just seem to go hand in hand, and the incidence of diabetes has tripled over the last 30 years and is now at epidemic levels. And of course, you know, in the class that I'm going to teach, we discuss the food industry and agricultural trends that have gone hand in hand with this epidemic, okay? But now about 10% of the US population now has diabetes. When we talk about type 2 diabetes, we used to refer to that as adult onset diabetes, okay? But now 12-year-olds are getting type 2 diabetes. 10-year-olds are getting type 2 diabetes. Of all the people that have diabetes, almost 23% of them are undiagnosed. Of adults over the age of 20, 37% of them will have prediabetes. And by the time we get to age 65, 51%, over half of us will have prediabetes. And why is diabetes a big deal? It tends to wreak havoc on our arteries, and you are as healthy as your arteries are later in life. And having clogged up arteries will lead to all sorts of downstream problems like heart attacks, chronic wounds, end organ failure, blindness, which we do not want to have. So what is the conventional wisdom about a proper diet for diabetics? That's count your carbs, right? No sugar, don't eat fruit. But Asian cultures had very low rates of diabetes prior to American fast food being exported there. And they ate a diet that was approximately 65 to 80% carbs. It was a rice-based diet. So you'd think if there was going to be a culture that would just be, you know, overwhelmed with diabetes, it would be an Asian culture, but that was not the case. They were about 2.5% incidence of diabetes. So first, it's important to understand what type 2 diabetes is and how insulin works in our bodies, okay? When we eat food, our digestive system turns the food into glucose, which is then going to be coursing through our bloodstream. Glucose is the fuel that we run on. We need glucose to be transported from the bloodstream into the cells so that we have the energy that we need to do everything, to go exercise, to do math problems. We require glucose. So I want you to imagine, like, look at this graphic here. Our cell walls are essentially covered with what looks like a bunch of, or what acts like a bunch of tiny locks on the cell walls, okay? Insulin functions as a key that basically opens up the locks on these cell walls and drives the glucose from the bloodstream into the cell so that it can be used as fuel, okay? When glucose remains outside of the cells in the bloodstream, our blood glucose level will be high. But then when glucose is driven into the cells, as it normally should be, then blood glucose levels will drop. So this is how our blood glucose levels are maintained within a normal range, is by insulin being able to drive the glucose into the cells whenever that's needed. So type 2 diabetes is a state in which high blood glucose levels build up in the bloodstream because the insulin is not able to drive the glucose into the cell. The cell is in effect resisting the insulin, and this is why we call it insulin resistance. You might have heard of that term too. Why is the insulin unable to drive glucose from the bloodstream into the cell in a type 2 diabetic? Well, Dr. Neil Bernard had this question, and he found from a new technology that they came up with called MR spectroscopy. You might have heard, you've heard of MRIs probably. This is magnetic resonance spectroscopy, but basically it's a technology that allowed them to really look at the on a very cellular level and see what was going on with type 2 diabetics. And they found that they had high buildups of fat on their cell walls. And this fat was in effect clogging up these little keyholes so that the insulin was unable to unlock that lock to drive the glucose into the cell. So then insulin and glucose in a type 2 diabetic keeps building up into higher and higher levels outside of the cell in the bloodstream because the cell is resistant to insulin. The insulin just can't get past that layer of fat, okay? So insulin resistance is in effect carbohydrate intolerance, meaning that you eat carbs, you eat anything, it's going to be turned into glucose. The glucose is not able to effectively make it into the cell. So it builds up at high levels in your bloodstream. That's carbohydrate intolerance. You're not metabolizing your carbohydrates properly. This is not a normal state, okay? But when we prescribe a low carbohydrate diet for diabetes, we are simply accommodating a pathological or a disease state of insulin resistance instead of treating the cause of the fat buildup. So Dr. Neil Bernard had a hypothesis, and that was that a low-fat, plant-based diet would simply undo the underlying problem of insulin resistance. So Dr. Bernard did a study in which he would test this hypothesis. And he felt that a low-fat, plant-based diet would simply melt the fat out of these cellular locks and allow the insulin to be able to do its work again, which is re-enter the cell and drive the glucose from the bloodstream back into the cell. So he did a randomized controlled trial. He got one group of patients and put them on a standard American Diabetic Association diet. And then he got another group of patients and he put them on a plant-based diet, no meat or dairy and very little oil, okay? And so the whole idea was to have a very low-fat diet so that we could overcome all this fat buildup. The goal is to just basically melt that fat out of the cell walls. And they found that the vegan diet, the plant-based diet, was 3 times more effective at decreasing that hemoglobin A1C number, the measure of blood glucose, and it reduced it by 1.2 percentage points. And in other similar studies, they found that 2/3 of participants when they went on a plant-based diet had to reduce or discontinue diabetes meds by 12 weeks in. Other studies demonstrated that insulin requirements of like an insulin-dependent diabetic that went on plant-based diets, that their insulin requirements were able to be decreased by 60% within 16 days. This is what happens when you treat the cause of insulin resistance, and this is really significant. This affects 10% of the population, and we found the same thing in our personal life. We just went on a plant-based diet and that hemoglobin A1C came right down. So let's move on to heart disease now. The reason diabetes is such a big deal is that it is a precursor to so many other downstream diseases that lead to death, and the main one is heart disease, which leads to heart attacks. So many of you watching this right now may have high cholesterol, you may have high blood pressure, or maybe have been diagnosed with coronary artery disease. You may have even had a stent or had a heart attack or bypass surgery, and you're not alone. We really all just seem to develop some degree of coronary artery disease as we get older when we're eating a standard American diet. But remember, there's those hospitals in Uganda without a single recorded case of a heart attack. But approximately 48% of US adults have cardiovascular disease, according to the American Heart Association. Every 40 seconds, someone in the United States has a heart attack. While we've been on this webinar, approximately 45 people have had a heart attack. This is the #1 cause of death in Western civilization. But lucky for us, there was a curious doctor, a general surgeon named Caldwell Esselstyn, that came along and hypothesized that perhaps you could reverse coronary artery disease with a low-fat, plant-based diet. So if you look at that first picture there on your left, that demonstrates a very diseased coronary artery. And this was actually in a fairly young doctor in his 50s. And you can see how it's all pinched off there and kind of twists and turns. This is not good. And this is in a major artery. It's the famous LAD, the left anterior descending, which is what we call the widowmaker, okay? And this gentleman was not a candidate for a stent or bypass surgery. So he met with Dr. Esselstyn, who put him on a strict plant-based diet. And after 3 years, if you look at the next film there, it's amazing. He had another angiogram, and you can see he just has a wide open garden hose of a left anterior descending. So Dr. Esselstyn did a study, this was back in like the early 90s, with 17 patients that had advanced coronary artery disease. And he put them on a whole food plant-based diet. And this group of patients, and he followed them very closely, they went on to live for 20 more years. And a lot of them are featured in the documentary Forks Over Knives. There was another doctor named Dr. Dean Ornish who performed similar studies that yielded similar results. He started back in the mid-80s. And originally, Dr. Ornish just hoped to halt the progression of coronary artery disease, which, you know, like back in the 50s even, we just assumed that heart disease was just an inevitable part of aging and there's just nothing we can do about it. And so Dr. Ornish was amazed with the same thing he found out. He found out the same thing that Dr. Esselstyn did, that the plaques could actually shrink or regress, not just halt, but get better on a plant-based diet. Patients had a 91% reduction in chest pain after only 3 weeks on a whole food plant-based diet. And to be clear, this doesn't just happen to the arteries in the heart. The arteries that feed the retina to your eyes, the lumbar discs, and even the penile arteries can heal and reverse the conditions of diabetic retinopathy, lower back pain, erectile dysfunction, and many more. Remember, you are as old as your arteries. And if you can keep your arteries healthy, you will be healthy. And just remember, the body does not heal itself selectively. Everything starts to get better when you start giving your body the right fuel. So what is the diet that is conventionally recommended in the mainstream medical field for heart health? Like when your doctor recommends you a statin or a blood pressure pill, they always give you some vague eat healthy recommendation. We used to always call it a heart healthy diet. That was our standing discharge orders for patients when they were going home after bypass surgery, which usually, you know, translates, like we talked about, in people's minds to eating turkey wraps all the time. But Dr. Esselstyn is famous for saying, in regards to a diet like this, moderation kills. And Esselstyn was somewhat ostracized in the medical community after his original study in the early 90s on these very sick cardiac patients. They said his results just couldn't be replicated in the real world. Like they'll say, just, it's too strict. No one's going to follow this diet. And they said it was only because of his militant zeal and his mind control over his patients that he was able to achieve these results in these 17 patients. So in 2014, Dr. Esselstyn did a repeat study in which he only gave 5 hours of instruction to a group of 177 patients and then tracked them for 3.7 years. And he compared their results to the results of a Mediterranean diet, which in this graphic you can see is the Lyon study, the Mediterranean diet. And that's about the healthiest diet that we can conceive of in the mainstream medical field. What they found was that cardiac patients following a Mediterranean diet, they were tracking the incidence of major cardiac events. On a Mediterranean diet, patients had a 1 in 4 chance, 25% chance of having a major cardiac event, which is heart attack, stroke, or death within the next 3.7 years, compared to only one patient in 177, a 0.6% major cardiac event rate for patients following a full whole food plant-based diet. This is a virtual cure for heart disease. And if I were playing Russian roulette, I would rather have a 1 in 177 chance as opposed to a 1 in 4 chance of surviving. So what is a whole food plant-based diet? Firstly, it is simply composed of real food that grows out of the ground, not just fake imitations of meat and dairy products, okay? People tend to think of a plant-based diet of being just salads and kale. And I would hazard a guess that many of you already, quote unquote, eat healthy on a standard American diet, meaning the chicken, salmon, turkey wrap diet. A lot of people are happy to eat a big salad every day, okay? But when we continue to have just our little bit of yogurt and our frequently and our, our white meat and our salmon and our oil, and our low-fat milk and a little bit of goat cheese or whatever. And sometimes we're eating way worse than that too. But I would ask you, has your daily salad plummeted your blood sugars, blood cholesterol, blood pressure numbers in as little as 2 weeks? So you really need to think about, instead of just like tweaking one thing on your current diet, we need to think about completely transforming our diet to what the research shows is the most health promoting diet that also reverses the most deadly disease. So a whole food plant-based diet, I want people to think not just of salads and kale, but to think of beans and rice, because we know what fruits and vegetables are, right? And a lot of people eat a lot of fruits and vegetables. I actually ate plenty of fruits and vegetables before I went on a plant-based diet, right? But I did not get legumes on a daily basis. Beans, peas, and lentils. These are crucial for health. This is where we get the bulk of our fiber. And we also want to get plenty of whole grains, all right? So we want to really focus on high fiber content of these whole grains and legumes. And then we're going to add fruits and vegetables on top of that. The high fiber content of a whole food plant-based diet has transformative effects on our health because it can pull excess hormones. The fiber pulls excess hormones, excess cholesterol out of our gut and eliminates it. So that's what we need. And that's what we're missing in our regular, quote unquote, healthy standard American diet. We're still filling up on animal protein. We're missing out on the fiber. And you'll see more from like my first class, the deleterious effects of animal protein with hormonal levels. And we're actually going to talk more about that here too. So yeah, and the biggest thing is eating legumes on a regular basis. That is the most important thing we can do. So your next logical question is, but where do you get your protein? We were all taught in 5th grade that we get the crucial macronutrient protein from meat and dairy. And so we need to get as many servings of these foods as we can so we can be healthy, right? And we're led to believe that we just can't ever get enough protein in our diet, right? But how many of y'all have ever visited someone in the hospital in the last couple of years, like a family or family member or friend? What were they in the hospital for? I mean, was it a protein deficiency? Usually we're hospitalized because of symptoms of chronic disease or injury that chronic disease causes to us, but we spend all of our waking lives agonizing about whether we're getting enough protein. So like pretty much every other subject in life, the more you learn about nutrition, the more the simplified 5th grade version you were taught just does not necessarily hold up anymore. Under the grade school nutrient classification system, everything on the whole food plant-based plate that I showed you earlier would be classified as a carb. But the reality is that all fruits, vegetables, legumes, and whole grains are actually a combination of protein, carbs, and fat. So what do you think has more protein? 100 calories of broccoli or 100 calories of steak, okay? When we compare two foods together, the only way we can really compare them scientifically is calorie for calorie, okay? So if we look at 100 calories of steak, that's about 3 slices of steak. 100 calories of broccoli is about 3 cups of broccoli. So let's look at 100 calories of steak. How much protein do we have? 6.4 grams, okay. Now, let's compare that to 100 calories of broccoli has 11.1 grams of protein, almost double the protein of the steak. So it's pretty amazing, but when you think about it, how do cows get their protein? All they do is eat grass all day. They get it from eating plants. So in real life, understand protein deficiency is actually very rare. I always tell people, if you have the use of your arms and you can propel food into your mouth, you are not going to be protein deficient. What we don't worry enough about in our society is being fiber deficient, phytonutrient deficient, and antioxidant deficient, which is very common. So what about crucial other nutrients we need, like calcium and iron and vitamins, okay? The vegetables you can see blow the steak out of the water as far as nutrient density and in protein content when we compare these foods calorie to calorie. And it's important to understand that, remember, meat, dairy, and eggs contain no fiber. Never had it, never will. Adequate fiber intake is crucial for human health. The average American only gets about 1/3 of the daily amount of fiber recommended for optimum health. And meat, dairy, and eggs don't contain any of these crucial antioxidants or plant chemicals, phytonutrients, okay? These are also crucial. We need these to fight carcinogens, and our health will steadily deteriorate without enough of these crucial micronutrients. Because meat and dairy are very high in cholesterol and animal fat, they fill us up, and then we don't really feel the need to eat more than our token small serving of vegetables on our plate. And so then we limit the amount of all these life-sustaining components that we need. And you may notice that the only number that is 0 under the plant column is cholesterol. Cholesterol is a necessary hormone. It's actually a hormone, but cholesterol, our liver makes all of the cholesterol that humans require. We do not actually require any cholesterol from dietary sources. And in real life, we all know that most of us have too high of a cholesterol level, right? We don't usually have to agonize about not having enough cholesterol in our diet. And so, you know, heart disease is the #1 cause of death. Lipitor sales are closing in on $1 trillion. And, you know, Lipitor statins lower cholesterol numbers by making our liver turn off the amount of, by making our liver stop making cholesterol. But lowering your cholesterol number does not repair the damage that the cholesterol and the meat byproducts have caused to the lining of our arteries. Our typical, someone with heart disease, the lining of the arteries are inflamed and very damaged. So just because you lower your cholesterol number, it does not make your arterial lining disease-proof, but a whole food plant-based diet does. And statin use has clearly not wiped out the #1 cause of death. It really hasn't made a dent in heart disease. So in summary, we don't need any cholesterol from dietary sources, but we do need calcium, iron, phytonutrients, antioxidants. And if you look on this chart, you can see all of these are much higher. The calcium level is much higher than in the broccoli than in the steak. The iron is like 5 times higher than in steak and broccoli. You know, the magnesium is much higher. So really, we can get all of these nutrients that we need from the plants. We do not require animal protein to get calcium and iron or protein, all right? Okay, so you need to understand there are 2 factors that determine the health benefits of any food, and this is nutrient density and hormonal favorability, all right? So we're gonna talk about nutrient density here. When we say nutrient dense, we are referring to micronutrients, vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, and phytonutrients. These are necessary for human health. And so this nutrient density scale goes from kale at a 100 all the way down to cotton candy, basically at 0. So if we are aiming for nutrient-dense foods, we're looking at fruits and vegetables. And the leafy greens are the most nutrient-dense up there at the top. And, like our nutrient density drops off, when we get to the more starchy vegetables, but they're still really important because we get a lot of fiber. The beans are like a 48, but we get really important soluble fiber, resistant fibers from that. Fresh fruits are up there. Whole grains are 22. But look at the bottom third, the bottom fifth of the nutrient density scale. That's where all of your animal protein comes in. So the animal protein is fairly low in nutrient density. If we look at red meat is only an 8 out of 100 in nutrients. All right, now let's look at cheese. Cheese is a 3 on the nutrient density scale. It is 3 points away from cotton candy. So why do we feed our children cheese? Why do we truly believe in our hearts that it's good for you, right? But it's 70% fat and has hardly any nutrition, right? And so in my class 2 and in the course, we talk a lot about diabetes reversal, and we talk about the connection between the United States cheese intake and the rise in diabetes over the last 30 years. So it's quite striking. But yeah, just think about that when we really examine, why do we eat meat and dairy? Why do we think it is healthy? It has very little nutrition in it as far as nutrient density. Okay, so the second component that is necessary for food to promote health is hormonal favorability. I remember where I was in my car when I heard this explanation on hormonal favorability from a lecture by Dr. Joel Fuhrman, and I pulled over and listened to it again. I still remember what exit I was at. It's kind of like when people remember where they were standing when they heard that JFK was assassinated. For someone who has worked in the medical field my entire life, I had never heard this information before, and it really changed my whole worldview about what we're supposed to eat. So the important thing to understand is that all animal protein, all meat, fish, dairy, and eggs, which is a complete protein, meaning that animal protein has high levels of all 9 essential amino acids that we need to get from food. All animal protein will stimulate the excessive hormone production, or the excessive production of a hormone called insulin-like growth factor 1, which I'm going to refer to as IGF-1. And also it creates a lot of hormone secretion such as estrogen. But these hormones lend themselves towards conditions that are favorable for tumor growth, okay? And we're going to talk about how IGF-1 does that. Mainly, IGF-1 encourages the growth of new blood vessels, which is a term called angiogenesis. So angiogenesis, angio means blood vessel, genesis means creation of. So imagine that if you have a mutated cancer cell that is nestled somewhere in your body, the only way it gets bigger is if it gets enough blood and nutrition. And so it requires a blood supply, all right? So this is where IGF-1 comes in, and it helps out this tiny little mass of cancer cells by stimulating the growth of new blood vessels to feed it so that it can grow. However, the protein found in plants does not stimulate excessive IGF-1 production, and your body will not tend to produce more blood vessels to make these tumors grow. So even if you have some mutated cancer cells in your body, and we all do, the thing we want to do is to make sure that these cancer cells do not rapidly double. We measure that by the tumor doubling rate. And so we want them to grow very slowly, if at all, okay? And the best way to keep them from growing is to get your protein from plant sources instead of animal sources, okay? There's even a Harvard cancer researcher named Dr. Lee who works in the field of anti-angiogenesis, which is what they do in cancer research. And he has pointed out that cancer cells will never grow any larger than 2 millimeters if they don't get a blood supply brought to them. So lower IGF-1 levels correlate with lower rates of cancer. And this understanding is corroborated by the findings of the China study, which Dr. T. Colin Campbell did, which was the largest population study on human nutrition ever conducted. He found that populations that consumed meat 4 times a week had which is way less than what we eat normally, right? Had a 70% higher rate of breast cancer than populations that consumed meat only once a week. And there was almost no breast cancer in populations that consume less than 10% of their caloric intake from animal products. So they are maintaining very low levels of IGF-1 and low levels of angiogenesis, or new blood vessel creation, by eating mostly plants. And they also have low to almost no rates of cancer. So we discuss this concept even in greater detail in my first Where Do You Get Your Protein class. So what kind of foods are humans supposed to eat? In summary, we want to eat foods that are nutrient dense and or hormonally favorable. So let's look at meat and cheese. They range from anywhere from 3 to 15 on the nutrient density scale. So they're not very nutrient dense. Remember, cheese is a 3. and they are also absolutely not hormonally favorable, because all animal protein will stimulate IGF-1 production. Understanding this concept is crucial to understanding that, contrary to what we were taught in 5th grade, meat and dairy do not promote human health. And this is something I also want you to understand. So remember Paul's story I told you at the beginning about how he went to the doctor initially because he had all these fatty tumors in his belly, right? And so we went on our plant-based diet. And after about 2 months on a plant-based diet, all these fatty tumors in his belly and on his legs just shrunk up and went away. And we had never seen anything like it. I mean, I had no idea that fatty tumors could get better. And that's because the blood supply that was feeding them just dried up once we took away the animal protein. And we're only eating plants. The protein from plants does not stimulate high levels of IGF-1, and things don't grow. So we don't want excess things to grow in our body. Once we're at middle age, it's usually not a good idea. So heal your body with plants. What do we eat on a plant-based diet? Here's the fun part. I'm going to show you some pictures, and yes, you can have carbs for those of you that have just come off of your paleo diet. A whole food plant-based diet can be up to 80% carbs. We can have, like, this is a picture on the left of oat and cornmeal pancakes with maple syrup and some fruits, just delicious. We have air fried potatoes all the time. This is a Chipotle ranch dressing that I make. You can make it like the base out of little tricks like using silken tofu or a cashew cream. We have all sorts of tricks that we can do to, take the place of dairy. We just need a creamy conveyance, and then we can put all our spices, garlic powder, Chipotle, whatever we want in it. So then we've got, here's another fun one, air fried onion rings. I even have an oven baked blooming onion recipe with Chipotle sauce. We can have portobello burgers. These are some of my favorites with like a cashew ranch dressing. But to be clear, there is nothing that you have to eat on a plant-based diet. If you don't like kale, you don't have to eat it once. I don't like bananas or beets, and I never eat them. So you will make a plant-based diet your very own. Here's some more pictures. We've got shepherd's pie. This is what I usually make for holidays. Hearty chilies you can make with all sorts of beans and vegetables, and you put some avocado on top and, some lemon juice or lime juice. Really delicious. You're going to be eating about 70 to 80% carbs, and you're going to be getting so much fiber. So this is a high satiety. The fiber is going to fill you up, but it has hardly it's a very low calorie diet. And so that's why the pounds just fall off. You are not hungry, and you're not getting very many calories, because whole foods are naturally low in calories. In fact, beans almost have negative calories because there's so much fiber. It just exits your body. And we're eating way less fat because plants have much less fat than animals. We're not eating fat-free versions like Snackwell cookies. We're not eating anything like that. We're eating all real food. But fat has 9 calories per gram, and protein and carbs have 4 calories per gram. And so that's the reason that a whole food plant-based diet is naturally low in calories. We do have natural plant fats in the whole foods that we eat, okay, the whole food plants. So after we switched to a plant-based diet, I was really amazed at how easy it was. Remember, I thought we were going to be miserable at first, but I just had such, like motivation to reverse Paul's diabetes. I was like, we're just gonna white knuckle through this. But then after we got started, I realized, oh my gosh, this is so easy. And I've spent decades in chronic disease management, and like I've designed programs to improve the health of heart failure patients and to like decrease hospital readmission rates. And so after I got my certification in plant-based nutrition, it occurred to me that I could just design a program that takes people that have no idea where to start, which is where I was when we started, and go through a step-by-step process where, first of all, you learn why a plant-based diet is vastly superior to the chicken salmon diets. And we give you a way to track your own personal progress, and then we bury you in recipes and resources with food assignments that will make you so full you won't even have any room for meat and dairy. So remember my old heart failure patient when he asked me, what should I eat? This is the class I wish I could have given him. And guess what? There's even new research that demonstrates that a whole food plant-based diet is greatly effective at even turning around end-stage heart failure and keeping patients off of transplant lists and out of hospice. It's amazing. So remember back in the old days when we could meet inside of buildings without masks on? This is how I used to do my old plant-based transformation classes, which I really enjoyed. And I can tell you, I never would have made it computer-based in a million years if it wasn't for COVID-19. But necessity is the mother of invention. So now I am pleased to present my online self-paced version of plant-based transformation for beginners. It took me about a year from when I started to develop this class in the form that it is today. This is completely self-paced, and like once you purchase it, you can just start immediately and you can go with the speed that's right for you. So the only requirement for the plant-based transformation for beginners course is to just know that you want to get healthier and to be open to trying new food. You do not have to have already made up your mind to never eat meat and dairy again the day you start the first class. Research has shown that every step that we take in a plant-based direction will improve our health. And it's so much more effective to just choose exciting new foods that you've learned to eat than to just white knuckle avoid foods that you love, that you've eaten your whole life without knowing what to replace them with. So that's how we start, is just learning new ways to eat fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and legumes on a regular basis. And then your taste buds are going to evolve and will start to pull you in a more plant-based direction over time. Even if you decide that you can't ever give up meat and dairy altogether, if you can just minimize these products in your diet while replacing them with health-promoting plants, whole food plants, you will improve your health. So let me run you through the curriculum just real quickly here. We start out with a pantry prep with a grocery list just to get your pantry loaded up with plant-based staples. And you don't have to figure it out and do all the research first. And these are all really inexpensive anyway. So if you get like spelt or something that you decide you don't like, you're just going to be out of $1.99. So anyway, we're going to get your pantry loaded up, and then you're going to complete a worksheet with your lab results on it. And these are lab tests that we commonly get done at an annual physical every year. So you may already have these lab results. I do recommend that you do a physician visit before you start this program, especially if you're taking meds for blood pressure or diabetes, because these conditions can improve very rapidly. I've had patients come off their diabetes or off their blood pressure meds in like 2 weeks. And your blood sugar will drop, and insulin and your oral hypoglycemics, the pills, the doses may need to drop rapidly too. So you need to meet with your doctor and get standing orders for how to decrease these medications as these conditions improve, because we do not want you to fall and hit your head. We do not want you to have a low blood sugar episode where you get all sweaty and shaky, okay? So then, once you get all your lab work, you're going to also have a place to write that all down, and you're going to understand what levels we're aiming for. And the biggest question I have when people go through this class is how strict do I need to be? So that's our homework assignment number 1, to fill in the how strict do I need to be sheet, because this is up to everyone. And I come from the real world, not the world of like Hollywood celebrities or only perfect people. Not everyone is dead set on living to be 115, okay? So each one of us has a different goal that we are aiming for, and a plant-based diet is the best way to improve health that there is. And so you're going to incorporate your how strict do I need to be sheet. You're going to write down what your personal goals are, and you're going to figure out how strict you do need to be. So generally, if you have diabetes, if you have heart disease, you have high blood pressure, you really need to be strict in order to reverse that. But you're going to have the information to make these decisions on your own, okay? And so once you have all that information in front of you, you're going to incorporate your objective physical status with your own health goals, like I want to dance at my granddaughter's wedding, etc. Figure out why are you taking this course? We all have a reason that we're not happy with our health now. What do you want to achieve? What goals do you want to attain? What do you want to do with your life if you can regain your health? This is the important thing to keep in mind. Stick it on your refrigerator. And so, yeah, you're going to formulate your own plan, and then we're going to watch some important plant-based documentaries. This is just the introduction, and we haven't even started the course yet. Okay, next slide. So this course was originally designed to run over 4 weeks with 1 class taught by me per week, during which time you slowly let go of like meat the first week. The second week you try to let go of dairy, and then refined oil the third week, and then we learn how to prepare whole food plant-based meals. I personally think it's a big ask to expect people to completely clean out their whole fridge on day 1 and not even know what to replace everything with. And so the feedback that I've gotten from people is that they really appreciate kind of the slow transition that I have built into this class. Of course, if you want to go off the high dive all at once, you can certainly do that. But then after I created this online course, it occurred to me like, well, you can even go slower than 4 weeks if you want to. You can go at whatever pace is comfortable for you. And the important thing to me is to feel that no one feels excluded from being able to start on this plant-based journey just because they think they might not be like have enough willpower to be one of these perfect people that just does everything cold turkey. So if you are just willing to try new food and keep an open mind, you can do this. So our first class is going to be all about protein. Where do you get your protein? Even way more in depth than what we talked about here. Lots of eye-opening research, the effect of plant versus animal protein on human health. The whole goal is to really get you to that epiphany moment, if you haven't already had it, that humans simply do not tolerate large amounts of animal protein very well and will almost universally develop life-limiting chronic diseases that start in their 4th and 5th decade and will worsen year after year. And no exercise will not completely obliterate these risks. So, and then you're going to have parameters on how much fiber you need to eat a day and how to track it. We'll talk exactly about how much of the different groups of whole food plants to prioritize for optimum health. And then we got another documentary for you to watch, or a lecture to watch on protein. And then I have some resource pages, plenty of resources with all the recipes laid out for you. And you're going to get a whole lot of links to like useful apps and videos and websites and Facebook pages for support. You're not going to have to think at all. It's all laid out for you. Class 2 is all about not only undoing type 2 diabetes, but also preventing it. Because remember, even if you don't have diabetes, by age 65, over half of us will. And you want to prevent that. And that's going to prevent all of those downstream complications that really just destroy our quality of life when we get older. So you'll see most of my classes run about 2 hours long. And so it's nice now because since it's in an online format, you can just hit that pause button whenever you need to. If you don't have time to watch a 2-hour class all at once, just watch it in whatever format you have. And so after the second class, our goal is to wean off of dairy, and I give you all the recipes and cooking techniques on how to replace dairy with plant-based alternatives that are really surprisingly delicious. We have a bunch of short videos from some plant-based doctors, dietitians, psychologists that will reinforce what we're learning. And then we have all sorts of recipes, resources, Facebook support groups, all sorts of stuff. You, again, do not have to think. And then class 3, next slide. Class 3 is my favorite class of all. It's all about a heart-healthy diet that actually works to make you heart attack proof. And you'll have a PDF copy of all the course material so you can like print it off for note taking. I recommend that you just get a binder so you can put all of the print-offs of the courses of all my classes, and then all the recipe sheets and anything you need, and just have it all in one place. And in class 3, after we discuss the research on heart disease reversal and really in depth about what we need to do to heal our coronary arteries, the foods that do that, then we're going to discuss cooking without oil. That's really necessary for heart disease reversal. And you'll also learn why this is crucial for arterial health. You're going to learn cooking techniques and recipes. And then we've got more lectures on coronary artery disease. And then all the recipes, resources, tips, and all my cheat sheets on all the highest nitric oxide foods, which is what puts out the fires in our coronary arteries. And I've got like a recipe for every kind of food you got. So class 4 is the last class. It's whole food, plant-based nutrition and weight loss. What does the research show is the most effective weight loss diet? And hint, it's a whole food, plant-based diet. Fun fact, my oldest son, who is not plant-based, he was already in college when we started a plant-based diet, he moved back in with us after coronavirus hit, and he lost 20 pounds in 2 months. Not even willingly. He just, not by choice. He was just too poor to buy his own food. And so, yeah, it's amazing how quickly you can lose weight with this. We discuss a bunch of tweaks that you can do to make the weight come off even faster. You're going to complete some worksheets in which you think through like maybe possible downfall situations like holidays, the break room. You're going to develop your own plan to keep you on track with some rubrics that I give you. You're going to view Game Changers if you haven't already watched that. That is a documentary. It's amazing about plant-based nutrition and athletic performance. My brother and his family converted to a plant-based diet after they watched that documentary. And then more recipes and more resources. So this course is designed with a very easy to follow format in which you click a completion button after each module, and it'll show you a percentage of your progress, and you can go back and forth, however you want, so you can get all the information whenever you're ready for it. So the plan is, this is the wrap up, after you have completed the 4 classes and build up your plant-based cooking skills, however long that takes, I designed it to be 4 weeks, but you can take longer if you want, and you can go faster if you want. But then after you've completed all the classes, the plan is you want to jump off the proverbial high dive and you want to go 100% whole food plant-based for 4 weeks, okay? 3 weeks minimum, but 4 weeks would be great. And then after this completely 100% period, then I want you to make an appointment for repeat blood work at your doctor's office. And I have detailed instructions on how to do this. And we're going to watch your doctor's jaw drop when they see all of your improvements. And if you haven't already, you're probably going to be needing to back off of meds under your doctor's direction at this point. So you need to keep in close contact with your doctor during this time, okay? So back when we did live meetings, we would meet 1 month later for what I call class 5. After the repeat blood work, which was my favorite class. And then everyone could share their plant-based transformation story. And a lot of people had dropped their A1C number, might come down like by 2 points at that point after like 2 months. A lot of people were off their blood pressure meds. They'd kick heroin-like sugar addictions. Some had dropped cholesterol by over 100 points. A lot of people would lose 15 to 20 pounds. So since everyone's going to be going through this class at their own pace, I decided the most useful tool would be to have a follow-up group Zoom coaching session afterwards that you can access just whenever you want. So these sessions are going to be open only to people who have completed the course or have at least completed the first 3 classes, okay? Because otherwise I don't want to bog the coaching sessions down with like, where do you get your protein questions? So after you register for the coaching session, you can do that from my website. And it's just, I just keep it at $20. I want to keep it really affordable and accessible for everyone. But after you register, then you will email me your questions in advance, and then I'm going to compile all the questions, and then we'll answer them all in a group format. But you'll find, like, you don't need to agonize about being perfect when you're going through the transition phase. I want you to just work on trying new food, and don't agonize about like everything being organic and, you know, like not using a microwave or crazy things like that. Like just work on the food. And then once you have pretty much transitioned over and you've developed the skills, then it becomes clear to you like the remaining questions that you have. And so that's a good time after you've developed all your skills to just really clarify those final questions that you maybe have and get some clarification. And also, if you don't have a plant-based physician that's following you, there's not a lot of them. Sometimes it's good to just get some affirmation and feedback that you are on the right course, okay? And so then once you've gotten your blood work back at these Zoom coaching sessions, that is an excellent time we want to hear your plant-based transformation story. So that's when you can tell us about all the results, all the exciting results that you've obtained after you've gotten your repeat blood work back. So right after I got my plant-based certification, I started out by just doing individualized coaching sessions. And then I realized there's so much material. This is just not a very efficient way to help people. So for about the same cost as this class, which you're going to get like 8 hours of lecture, I would just spend 90 minutes with people in an individualized coaching session. And they still had a whole bunch of questions, and I felt like we weren't really getting all the information they needed. So that's when I realized, like, I need to develop a class. And so with this class, like, you will have about 31 learning modules. You're going to have 4 weeks of classes. It's over 8 hours of direct classes taught by me. It's all on like Google Slides with me talking to you. But so, yeah, and then after all that instruction, then we've got the Zoom coaching sessions that are there to clarify any further questions you have, and so you can continue to get more support. You can go to these Zoom coaching sessions as often or as little as you want, but they're there as a resource. And I wanted to make those affordable so that you can just like keep getting any remaining questions clarified. And then, you know, all that's going on in the world right now, it's easy to get overwhelmed, especially when we have personal health issues that just add to our load of problems. And I found sometimes it's just exhausting trying to navigate the wilds of the internet. I mean, even if you're like, I want to do this, but, you know, it's really hard to learn a new concept or skill completely from scratch. I mean, I have purchased online classes before when I decided it's just time to jump off the high dive and just get this thing taken care of, when I don't have time to comb the internet and discern truth from fiction on a topic that I really don't know much about. There's just something to be said for circumventing the need to agonize over a bunch of details and just push the easy button. So for those of you viewing this webinar, you can get 10% off the class with the coupon code HEALWITHPLANTS, all caps, no spaces, which will make the course $99. So you may be thinking, I just don't know if I'm ready yet. A plant-based diet seems like such a huge change and it might be kind of inconvenient. But it's important to understand that, speaking of inconvenient, you know, with my patients, I would often see their health deteriorate to such a point that their ability to live their lives the way they wanted was completely impeded. And usually in the end, it robbed them of their independence and their quality of life altogether. And then what would happen, they would get to a point where we would offer a very extreme surgery or a massively invasive, costly treatment as the only off-ramp for their just precipitously declining health. And this choice would frequently greatly upend their lives. Sometimes they'd have to sell their home and move closer to like Little Rock, where we are in the big city, and be close to their doctors and spend the majority of their week in some kind of medical treatment. And this greatly interrupts any sense of normalcy they could hope to have. It takes away time, you know, spent with grandchildren, memories that they could have created. Sometimes their adult children would have to quit their jobs to care for them. So I guess the moral of the story is the standard American diet just does not lend itself to a vibrant and vigorous lifelong health into our advanced years. The majority of Americans are going to face a serious decrease in their quality of life and really may only be able to prevent an untimely death by undergoing massively invasive and costly treatment. This is the whole reason I created this course. Remember, originally I thought a plant-based diet was going to be really hard to follow, but after we switched and I realized how delicious and filling the food was and how easy it was to stick to, it just seemed almost criminal to me when I thought of all my patients over the years who had suffered so much. I mean, really needlessly, because they simply just did not have this information. So I don't want that to be you. And remember, what may start out as just some slightly out of whack blood work, like Paul's little pre-diabetes, will always worsen if we only treat the problem with medication and we never address the underlying cause. It's the food. It's been the food all along. But now you can take a different path. And as Hippocrates says, we can let food be our medicine and let medicine be our food. So the next step to purchase this course, you can simply go to naturalstateplantbased.com or just click on the link in this email, and then you'll have instant access to the entire course. So I want to thank you for all your time today and for allowing me to be part of your journey to transform your health. Take care now. Bye.